Okay. So, hello everyone and welcome to a very interesting, mysterious at the same time, and exciting topic for discussion of today. Interesting because it's always when something is somewhere far away and you don't know what it is, you want to find out. Mysterious because it's still somewhere in the sky. It's not, you are not sure what is there again, but when you find out, it's quite exciting to know that probably it's quite safe there, but still maybe you have some concerns, of course. And I'm very happy that today we have a very experienced panel of guests who have first-hand information about security in the cloud. First of all, yes, one of our guests is in a hurry, Alejandro Pinta, who is a cybersecurity expert working for the European Commission. So he has much of experience from the regulator's point of view, which he will probably share with us first. And then we have guests from provider side, from Microsoft, Rüdiger Dorn, and Amazon Web Services, Christian. So we will be listening to their side of the story and their side point of view. And I will skip my introductory part. I will say it later, and maybe I will give the word to Alejandro first. So please share with us what are the concerns from the regulator side, or maybe some words which will comfort the audience. And the audience, please, I invite you to take active part and ask questions. So please.
Very good. Thank you very much. Indeed, as said, my name is Alejandro Pinta. I work in a unit in the European Commission dealing with cybersecurity from two perspectives. The economic impact of cybersecurity, the so-called trust we need to create upon which develop further the digital economy, and a second perspective will be the data protection and privacy of personal data. I want to give you today a positive message. The European Union nowadays is the most reliable and trustable economic area in the world to set business in the digital economy because of the legal framework that guarantee, and you can be reassured about that, the data protection, the personal data protection, will be absolutely respected here in this economic area. There are no way, and I will put now an example, that your data will be used for purposes to which you didn't give your agreement. I said this because not only European companies, but also companies from other countries are deciding to open offices here and invest in Europe. For instance, Apple announced the investment of 1.7 billion in European data centers. We have also IBM and Amazon investing important budgets in Europe, as well as Salesforce, another company less known but very important one. So what I mean, it's not only that it is today a trustable economic area to set your business, but also will be in the future for two reasons. Though we have a directive on data protection that has worked pretty well so far, and the principles remains, we are now reviewing this directive. It will become, let's say, a regulation. Should be announced if things go in the right direction before the end of the year. And with that, we want to adapt the regulation to the current, let's say, digital challenges. The directive we are using right now dates from '95, if I remember correctly. So we want to create a new regulation for the coming at least 20, 30 years that will serve as base over which to develop further business online and to guarantee a legal framework that in a way that you don't need to worry about how why you give your personal data to a company, because it's something that is guaranteed on that. This data protection regulation will guarantee more trust in how you share your personal data. We ran few surveys during last year, and one of the main concerns of the users when using services online is that they have to give too much data to this. Data today has become kind of the gas of the digital economy. With that, the economy could not work. I mean, this is the oil of the 21st century. So we must, as public authorities, guarantee that the data of the citizens is used in a proper way, but also is correctly maintained. The second thing of this data protection directive is not to create new burdens for startups. I mean, when you create new regulation, you run always the risks to block the markets for those that are not so big and just want to access to the market. This regulation takes that into account. We want to enhance the transparency on how you as citizen can access to your personal data, know what is happening with it. You want to guarantee that you have access to your own data, something that is not happening today in all cases. We want that the companies where they are defining services or products, they take into account the security and the privacy from the beginning, the so-called by design, and not later on. And we want also, among the 28 member states, to have the same level playing field. Let's say because now you have very guaranteed countries and another that are not so guaranteed. So we're going to create same level in order to promote what this new initiative of the Commission called single digital market. This single digital market cannot simply exist when rules are applied in a different way all around Europe. So, again, my apologies for not being here for the discussion, what I think will be very much interesting because this thing is quite popular right now. Overall, because yesterday, though will be officially approved next week, in the European Union has been, I don't know if temporarily, but so far has been cancelled, the so-called safe harbor agreement. Yes. That means that data of European citizens can be freely freely exchanged between the European Union and US. So this has been put on hold and need to be reviewed again in the future. I don't know what is now the situation.
Do you have any already ideas from the Commission what to do with that?
No, this is so recently. We knew that this was coming, but it's happened yesterday, so there's still no ideas how that could progress, at least not myself. But okay, though this could be negative for certain business, it's a good sign to the companies set in Europe that the governments of Europe are really committed on applying the laws they are putting forward. I see at least that is a positive value of the European Union itself.
Okay, thank you. Are you still open for a question or two? Okay, maybe the audience would like to have a question. Okay, please, Rüdiger.
I have a question. You talk about common standards across the digital single market. What I see at the moment is that we have a lot of interaction with the Article 29 working group and the European Commission in the center, yet it requires a lot of effort to discuss with every single country, with states within countries. So it seems to be a very fragmented discussion still. What is the plan to make this easier?
With the plan to make it easier, I don't know if that will be easier because in Brussels nothing is easier. But the plan is to put forward this data protection new regulation that will gather all the sensitivities around because countries are different with different needs. So this new regulation will host all these sensitivities. But I'm not sure that this will, let's say, solve the problem of discussion. For the time being, Working Party 29 will have a different name. It will be more a board of member states dealing with data protection. Will be easier how anybody could report any incident or data breaches to one single authority. So we will simplify the system. About how to make the discussions easier among 28, not only in data protection, but in whatever field, I think is impossible. So I don't think it's that. But okay, it's also a positive value of the European Union. When you get forward, you really give a consistent and a solid step forward. I mean, it's not based because the discussions are so tough.
And maybe you know already something more about the timeline regarding the new regulation, when it's likely to be passed and adopted, finalized.
Yeah,
at
there
least.
are two, let's say, deadlines, or two deadlines you have to keep in mind. One is about the data protection regulation, an initiative that comes from time ago, that publicly has been said that will be adopted by the end of this year, so in the coming months. This is one thing. Implementation will be in 1.5 years, right? And a second initiative, quite relevant also, but applying only to electronic communications, and it is one of the 16 initiatives in the Digital Single Market Strategy, is the e-privacy directive. The privacy will take into account everything that happened, this massive surveillance, what is the current situation of the data traveling through all these virtual networks, and will put forward a directive that will try to against guarantee that the data of our citizens, the communications in the European Union are managed in a safe way. And this will be, if you want a date, but okay, this is a bit, 1 year, like by summer next year. This is what you can find in the digital single market strategy, so by 2016, but okay.
Okay.
It's a long way, a complicated one to get.
So please, the audience, use the opportunity to ask questions. It's difficult for me to see hands. Probably there are no hands. Maybe some other questions from the panel.
If there are no questions now, it doesn't matter. Later on, if the colleagues don't mind, I have no problem in replying to whoever else. I mean, you can give your question to my colleague, and then he will send me the question, and I will reply. In Commission, we are always replying this kind of questions. So thank you very much. Apologies for having to rush to the airport, but otherwise, I will spend my night in the airport. So thank you.
Thank you for being here with us and sharing your experience and knowledge from inside of the government side. Thank you. So, as promised, I will tell a few words from my personal experience with the cloud and cloud security and safety. I personally am a lawyer. My field is IT law, which I'm focusing on mostly. And at our law firm, to which I worked recently, a few years ago, we had a question what to do with our internal servers, which got old, which managed all our data, emails, files. So we had to make a decision whether to invest in the renewal, in new servers, new hardware, also software side, or maybe to take a decision to switch to the cloud. And switch probably today is the keyword. And we we wanted quite much to move away from our internal technical equipment, because it takes many efforts to manage, it's costly, and you are not so sure if it's quite safe to have a server in your inside your office. So we decided to move to the cloud, and we did that. But one of the main concerns for us as a law firm was that I'm sure also other entities, but a law firm manages quite much of data which is sensitive and which is client data, privileged data, commercial secrets. So it was very important for us that we at least comply with all the legal regulations, with legal requirements when moving that data somewhere away, when we don't probably always know where, in fact, that data will be stored. So we did our due diligence, and we found that actually the cloud service providers offer, well, very favorable terms for us, because they promise to take responsibility and comply with even localized EU version of legal requirements. So we were able to sign some additional annex to our cloud services agreement, which gave us legal security for our data, which was basically the most important aspect for us. And also we moved our files, not only emails, but our files to local data center in Lithuania. And after that, we also agreed the legal terms which were important for us, that no one has access to the data, that if some government asks for data, we are informed, and so on. So we were quite safe from the legal point of view. But when we visited the data center, of course, we were shown the technical side of safety, or how safe it is to keep our data in the data center, which is third-tier data center. It has double walls, double fire safety and security, double channels of communications coming in, electricity, local electricity generators. So it was obviously very safe inside. But when I asked to our guide a question, well, what would you do if just someone would ask you to give our copy of our server? So the guide, she was clearly unprepared to answer. She thought for a second and said that, okay, if that was some kind of order from government or officer, so probably, yeah, we would give it away, which was, again, very much of concern for us, because, you know, we don't want any government agency, any institution to have very easy access to our data. And it showed one thing, that there are many, many layers in terms of security in the cloud. And the technical side, I think, is quite resolved now. But when it comes to personnel management, from human factor, there are also many aspects to be considered. And of course, my story probably shows that the provider in this case was not so prepared, and the training for the people was not in place. Simply the guide did not know how correctly answer my question. So I would ask now Rödiger to say a few words and to share ideas from the provider's perspective, how safe it is there in the cloud, and what are the concerns from the users, and how would you comfort them?
Okay, thank you. So first, as an introduction, I'm Rödiger. I'm part of the CTO office in Microsoft, so I'm part of the headquarters in Seattle, but I'm based in Munich, and I look after cloud computing here in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And one of the biggest tasks is, how do we build that trust with our customers, that they actually feel good enough that they hand over the data into our data centers and give us that big task that we manage the data for them, which is, of course, a substantial amount of trust you need to give to that vendor for various reasons. And I would say there are a couple of aspects to really touch on. And the first one is, if you think about the business model, whether it's Microsoft, whether it's Google, whether it's Amazon, that business model is all predicated on the fact that we keep your data secure. Microsoft is worth $350 billion in shareholder value. If our data centers are breached and all the data would be stolen, we would go bankrupt. So the interest of Microsoft to maintain that safety of data, to maintain the integrity of your data, obviously paramount, because it is the lifeblood of our business. However, even having said that, the question is, how can you be sure and have a good feeling about the fact that we take care of your data? And I would say there are a couple of things I would mention. The first one being transparency. So one of the things that I did together with my colleagues in the US is we implemented a tool which is called the Trust Center. So when you go into the browser and look for Microsoft Trust Center, you find a lot of information that talks about what kind of encryption there is, where are the data centers, where is the data stored, what is happening with the data, etc. So you can convince yourself about what Microsoft will do with the data. And we feel this transparency is a very important part of earning the trust. So it is not just because I tell you, hey, Microsoft is great and has great data centers that you should give me your data. It's really that you should challenge us. You challenge Microsoft, you challenge other providers. What do you do with the data? Do you use it for data mining, etc.? And the Trust Center, for example, is one source where you can go and you can convince yourself of what is happening with the data and where it's processed and under which conditions does someone look at the data. The second thing, of course, is Trust Center is a website. You can write many things in a website. So maybe you don't want to believe what we write in our Trust Center. Go to the regulators. Go to the European Union. I liked Alejandro's presentation in terms of trying to finally, the next level of data protection regulation, because we are working very closely with the European Union, and if they set a clear bar, we are very committed to hit the bar. We have a letter by the Article 29 working group, by all the data protection officers of the European Union combined, that says Microsoft is a trusted and secure cloud service. And we are quite proud about this letter because it required a lot of investment about things like, if I leave the service, my data will be hard deleted within 6 to 8 weeks. Things that were not easy for us to implement, but these are things that now the European Commission says, okay, Microsoft is a trusted cloud provider. And equally, there are ISO standards, there are things like ENISA, NIST, external organizations, our auditors that will give that testimonial on our behalf. The third thing I would argue is, even beyond that, we are collaborating with the industry. So Amazon and Microsoft, we are working together as part of the Cloud Security Alliance. Cloud Security Alliance is an industry organization where large cloud providers collaborate to exchange latest technologies on security to further bring the security standards up and better protect your data. So it is not just us working in our isolation. Actually, we collaborate with our competition in the context of the Cloud Security Alliance. We also collaborate with the government of Lithuania. We collaborate with the European Union in exchanging attack information. So our digital crimes unit is a partner of the government of Lithuania, is a partner of the European Commission to talk about who's trying to steal data from Microsoft, who's trying to maybe steal data from your PCs. We see that, we monitor some telemetry, and we share this information with the law enforcement agencies. So we collaborate with Interpol, we collaborate with the police, again, trying to make sure that the data is kept as secure as possible. The last comment I would make is, it is tricky with a cloud provider because the data is somewhere, and we as human beings react always suspiciously when we do not see where things happen. And if things are in the cloud, our immediate reaction is, oh, I cannot control this. Not seeing where the data is stored may not mean that it's the biggest risk, and this is where the security issues are. I would argue that when you look at the whole value chain of information being typed into an endpoint device, then being transferred over the internet, being stored in the cloud, there are a lot of risks for security, like, is my password secure? Do I change my password every 3 months? Is my device secure? Do I encrypt my PC? Do I use BitLocker or other encryption technologies? All these things, I would argue, are equally critical from an end-to-end perspective, as is the question, is my data stored in Microsoft or Amazon in a secure way? Because at the end of the day, when you look at the statistics, the majority of the data thefts do not actually occur down in the data center. They occur because someone steals your password, steals your identity, because someone steals your PC, someone breaks into your car and steals your mobile phone. And it's not actually the cloud that is the weakest link, it is the piece before and after. And that one I would really bring up into consideration, because it's only the end-to-end security that will count, not just whether the data is secure where it is in the Microsoft data center.
Okay, thanks. We heard about the recent news from the European Union government side that European Court of Justice just released a recent decision on the safe harbor principle. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Microsoft does not operate under the safe harbor principle, and it will not affect your services?
No, the statement has to be different. The statement has to be that Microsoft operates, of course, on safe harbor, but it goes beyond safe harbor, and there are additional control mechanisms, which are the European model clauses. And these European model clauses actually are a more trusted instrument that has been brought in by the European Union already a couple of years ago, because a lot of officials thought that the safe harbor rules were not sufficient. So in a way, the court ruling now only confirms what a lot of European policymakers have already felt, and from that perspective, there are other instruments in place. So I have to say there is a bit of confusion around this messaging, because the statement was around, I enter my data into Facebook or into a cloud provider, it goes into the US, and then the NSA will have access. It's of course not like that. If you store the data in a Microsoft data center, you can define whether it's in Europe or whether it's in the US. If it's in Europe, it will stay in Europe. It will not go to the US as a default. Even if the NSA wants to have access, there are law enforcement requests that need to happen. And as such, it is not like a blank check where any secret service, whether it's the MI6, whether it's the NSA, whether it's the German Secret Service, can have access to any of this data. There are rules. And if the rules and the procedures are followed, we will hand over the data. But if not, the data will not be handed over. If what happens, the NSA taps into data centers, like they break into Google data center, they tap into lines, this is a different question. And if you read the news, if you read the press, you'll find that there have been several court rulings in the US where Google, Apple, and Microsoft jointly sued the US government for these things. So actually, the cloud providers in that case take the position of defending the customer rights and not being on the government side of the United States.
Okay, thanks. What about the users? How safe do you feel? Maybe you want to clarify how safe is your data and what to do if your password was taken over by someone, or some other questions or concerns. Okay. Okay, so we have also a panel member from Amazon, which I think is to some extent competitor to Microsoft. But probably when it comes to security, data safety, I think all the providers are on the same side. So what, from your experience, Christian?
Yeah, so I mean, I agree, we collaborate on a number of subjects, Microsoft and AWS. But, you know, I think model clauses, which you mentioned earlier, is you know, one of the mechanisms to answer a question earlier, is one of the mechanisms some of our customers use as well to transfer data back and forth. But our approach in AWS and Amazon Web Services is always starting from the customer and from what the customer wants. And we're also a very technical company. And our customer requested us not to transfer data outside, to build an infrastructure that allows them to make sure that the data that themselves they collect off their users never leaves the EU. And that's why we have the concepts of regions, which we have. And we have two regions in the EU, one which is in Dublin, one which is in Frankfurt. And the concept of those regions is extremely important for us because it means that the data always stays there. That by default and by no other mean than the user or the company using us, choosing not to, but that data always stays in Dublin. It means that if
basically you are even not concerned with the data transfers somewhere abroad,
so
it stays
a startup
inside?
that uses customer data and uses customer data to store them on AWS and they pick a Dublin region, that data will always stay in Dublin if they choose so. So, you know, for us, that's really important that because our customer asks for that, we implement those features. The other you know, answer that I ask a lot by my customers is saying, well, what about encryption, you know? And you can use cloud providers, or companies can use cloud providers with encrypted data. It means that a lot of our customers encrypt data at rest on their site and then store it on the cloud. And the only thing AWS as a cloud provider sees is ones and zeros with the data that's highly encrypted. So even if we have a request for that information, we just don't know what that information is. And you know, our approach is to give those tools to our customers and to make sure that they feel very, very comfortable using our cloud by providing an extremely high standard of security. And to your comment at the start, which I thought was kind of funny, if you were given a tour of the data center, I would have worried at that point. Because you know, tours of data centers are just a security risk. When you're a cloud provider, you have thousands and thousands and thousands of customers, you know, that are stored in that data centers. Why would you give a tour to one of them when would you otherwise appreciate? You know,
well,
and
it's a small data center in Lithuania. They need some marketing, you know, so to show to
But-
the world how safely they are.
But you know,
Yeah.
you know, my colleague here was saying, you know, we complied to standards and ISO standards, for example, and those standards which we're compliant to forbid us from doing those things, and we comply to those standards. As an Amazon employee, I have no access to those data centers. I have no need to be there. And you know, and those are kind of the technologies and the processes and certifications that in Amazon we proud ourselves with, because we think that the cumulus of all those make storing data in the cloud much more safe than, for example, in a local provider that actually doesn't implement those standards to the high level we do.
Okay, thank you. The end users are not concerned yet about the safety. So let me ask you from the user side, what, as you said as an example, what happens if I lose my password to access the cloud services? What help can I get from the provider side? And well, basically, how safe can I feel in that situation? What tools do I have?
Start. So I think from an AWS point of view, we need to remember that we're an infrastructure provider. So we provide services for customers that run on it. So example being Dropbox, Airbnb, Halo, you know, those are the users of AWS services. So you know, generally our interaction isn't with the end user. But for those customers, you know, those, believe it or not, those companies as well need passwords and security to log on to their services. And what we do is we use multi-factor authentication, for example, where, you know, they use the Gemalto key and make sure that that password is generated once and only that person can access it. So, you know, from an infrastructure point of view, we have a lot of mechanism to ensure that people, if they don't lose their key first, and if they lose the key, they can recuperate it through very secure manners. Also, just to add to that, you know, to make sure that those organizations have the right controls is there's a lot of tools in the cloud now that allow you to have way more control over your infrastructure than on the hardware point of view, because everything that's software is auditable. So you can audit every single packet that goes within your infrastructure, and we give those audit rights to our end users. So our end users are capable of actually seeing if one of their employees logged on to the cloud or logged off, made a change, what change they made at what time, and revoke those rights if they need to be. I assume your answer is going to be slightly different from the end user point of view.
I would say, as far as the dual-factor authentication using mobile phone plus your password, it's the same. I would probably, coming from a different portfolio Microsoft has, interesting things coming into Windows 10, like iris scans, etc. We're going away from password. Password is bad. Password, you lose passwords, and you don't change passwords as frequently as needed. So yes, we're looking into what technologies, fingerprint, iris scan, beyond, we can improve. So things like using the Kinect sensor from the Xbox, will the Kinect sensor be able to recognize you in the future? These are things we are developing towards. So more going into machine learning, understanding is this the real person, and therefore increasing the security pattern and taking out that security, I lose my password, and therefore, what do I do? So I would not discount the hardware at this stage. I think it's, again, this end-to-end cycle, and we're looking into how can we deploy other technologies on the device side that will improve effectively the security of access.
Okay. Thanks. And another question, probably also coming from my, again, personal experience. What if someone just asks you to give data? Because you have all the tools to make copies and to just provide the data of your users. So what happens? I also experienced that when we call for some support to the cloud provider, we are quite carefully checked against the data which we provided. Is it really the person who receives the service who is calling now for the support? So I sense that we were checked quite carefully, even for support for the cloud service. But maybe from the side of governmental institutions. So what if government asks you to give data to them? What is the procedure? What do you do? And actually, in our case, we saw that in comparison to Lithuania, where governmental requests are granted by courts, almost over 90% of cases, they are just granted to the prosecutors, to police officers. But we saw that cloud providers have much lower numbers, maybe in the 2%, 5% of granted requests from the governmental side. Maybe you have some renewed statistical data for us. What is the share of granted requests, and in general, what is the procedure? What do you do if the government asks you to provide the data?
I would like to take a step back. I think there's a fundamental challenge everybody needs to understand, and it is the challenge between my right for privacy, my right to own my data and nobody can access the data, versus the obligation to collaborate with law enforcement agencies in case something criminal happens, and to support the investigation of that criminal case. And this challenge is not only happening in the cloud, this is happening everywhere. I mean, you have the right to that nobody will read your letters, yet if you are suspected of drug trafficking, people will go into your house and get all the letters and get all the materials. And it's the same thing for the cloud. I have all the rights to keep my privacy and store my private documents. However, if I would start trafficking weapons out of Lithuania, of course, there is an obligation by the cloud provider to collaborate with the police to disclose that data. So there are, the big question here is, what are the governing rules under which this can happen? And the governing rules are very simple. It is the law enforcement agreements within the country, within the European Union, and between the European Union and the United States. So let's assume the United States is interested to understand weapon trafficking out of Lithuania. The proper process is that US court will issue a court request to Europe and to a court in Lithuania to say, I would like to seize data from Mr. X because we think there's a criminal activity. If that happens, and the Lithuanian court will say it is a justified request, we as Microsoft will hand over the data, because it is in collaboration with the police and the law enforcement agencies. If the Lithuanian court says no, Microsoft will not hand over the data. What we will do in any case, and this comes back to that transparency that I mentioned before, we will give you transparency about these things happening. So if you go to the Microsoft site and search for transparency report, you will get to a page where you can see how many requests have come out of the US to hand over data to Microsoft. How many requests have come out of Germany? How many requests have come out of the UK, etc. So we are transparent about how many requests there are and what have been the responses. So you can see that we have never handed over data to the US authorities so far, because we have not had any justified requests according to the procedures that I just described. However, if there is the need, we will collaborate. So from that perspective, this is something, as much as we are customer-centric, we are also government-centric and collaborate with law enforcement, and we will always do the right thing if it is justified by the local court. And that is, I think, what gives you the trust that you can operate on. So to your point, it is not, oh, if the government comes, I'll hand over the data. No, it's absolutely not the case. So the government needs to come with a specific court ruling that you are suspected of doing something criminal, and therefore this data needs to be seized. And then, yes, there is the right to hand over data.
Of course. Yes,
Yeah, so I mean, the answer is very, very similar in terms of transfer of data, and we will notify you as well, you know, if those requests do come in. In Lithuania, we don't operate, so, you know, it wouldn't be an example that applies to us here. But, you know, in the example of your example, in terms of professional examples, yeah, I'll go back to the question of encryption. You know, we have partners, we have resellers that develop applications on top of our infrastructure that specialize for law professionals that encrypt the data for users just like you. And that data is encrypted by those third-party providers. And generally, you know, again, if the law enforcement agency comes to us or anybody else and asks us for the data, even if we're compounded to transfer it over, it will be highly encrypted by that provider. So to us, it will have no meaning, and you know, and that's all as much as we can do. But you know, as Amazon, as Microsoft, we do comply with local law, and we are very transparent in the same way about all requests we get in Europe and in America and in Asia.
Okay. Yeah, it's from the provider side, probably you just don't want to give your services to people who intend some criminal activities. So maybe it should be quite sensible and reasonable that you cooperate with the government. I, as a user, would want you also to cooperate if my neighbor use your service for some criminal intentions, probably. But to continue a bit on the same topic, well, how do you decide that, and how do you find courage to say to the government institution that, okay, your request is not valid one, we will not comply? Because there is large percentage of such requests which are denied. And I know from Microsoft example that from your published statistics that in very low number of cases you comply with such requests. So how do you evaluate those? How do you find reasons not to comply, and maybe courage?
To me, I mean, the courage, I don't know if it's courage or not, but I mean, I think it's the element of scale, right? I mean, we have a lot of customers. We have thousands and thousands of customers, and we have a very large infrastructure in terms of hardware, in terms of purchase power. And that purchase power, for example, allows us to reduce our prices all the time. But it allows us to do the same thing. It allows us to actually hire the best lawyers we can find, and to hire the best legal team we can possibly find, and make sure that, you know, that those people look after our customers. And I think that's the difference of that's the power of the cloud, you know, in terms of, you know, prices, for example. We can work at a scale that an individual buying his own hardware and building his own data center can't do. You know, that applies to all elements. It applies to purchasing power, but it applies to the legal team as well. And I know that Amazon Web Services is the best lawyer in the market that we can possibly find, and make sure that the law applied is in the right way, and that we fight the injunctions that we need to, and comply to the one we need to as well.
Okay, thanks. Good to know. What about, probably this very similar answer would be,
Yeah,
I'm not sure whose lawyers are better.
I have to smile about this thought whether the lawyers become the core competency of a cloud provider. But of course, it comes down to a legal process, and that then collaborates with the law enforcement agencies in the country, and it's a scale thing. It's interesting to hear that we operate in some countries where Amazon is not, but I can tell you there are countries where this is an issue, and we are stopping services. So in certain countries around the world, cloud services are not available for exactly that reason, because we do not have the legal environment in place, and we're obliged to hand over data. And there are certain countries in the world where we cannot operate because the governments require us to switch off encryption, and we don't do that. So then the services are not available.
Okay. So I would really like to invite the audience to ask at least one question, please. Please, would someone help us with the microphone? I can, but the audience, I'm not sure. So, or maybe, yeah, thanks.
Thanks a lot. Okay, thanks a lot for the brilliant presentation. I would like to get some information. You referred to picking some regions where you store your data. For example, the Dublin area and Frankfurt area. Is it some kind of a forum shopping, like picking the favorable jurisdiction in order not to get stuck into the differences of jurisdiction, for example, the e-discovery issues and these kind of things, or you just like follow the best technological solutions in the areas, or you're just really picking the jurisdictions?
So when you mean picking the jurisdiction, do we?
I mean, you know, for example, if the data is traveling, like constantly traveling around the European Union countries or something like that, you never know where the information is at the, you know, exact time. You can get stuck into the you know, like really major differences between the jurisdictional rules in Europe, let's say, where you can get if you issue the, let's say, subpoena in the US, maybe there's no such thing in Europe, but you can get requirement to hand over the data in one country, while the legal framework does not allow you to get that kind of information in the other country. So what's the reasoning behind picking these regions to store your data? Is it technological solutions or jurisdictional solutions?
Yeah, I guess I'll answer on behalf of some of our customers that use those regions. So generally, customers use the one region or another. Frankfurt, it's generally price is, you know, there's different pricing for each of those regions. So based on local factors, and some of the regions are cheaper to operate in than others. So generally, those are the reasons the customer use. Those ones are technical. So having a region closer to your end users just makes more sense from an internet traffic point of view. Also, some customers operate in Europe. I'll give you examples of some government customers, for example, that do operate in the UK. They will choose EU regions to operate in. So they will operate in Frankfurt and in Dublin because the data that they use is stored in those regions and never leaves it. And that's why our customers use the different regions. But you know, I think it's also a strength because it allows customers that start in a specific region, so for example, build a product that's in Dublin or in Frankfurt, to actually expand very, very quickly and create you know, an exact mirror of that product in a different region. Halo is a good example of that, where, you know, they started building their product in Dublin, and then when they decided to move it to North America, they decided to expand their business to North America. It's just cookie cutter, so just copied the infrastructure over there. But they respect that infrastructure, and for example, I don't think Halo moves data in between the two regions. In terms of, you know, data request, which I think part of your question was there, you know, the answer is the same one as I was giving earlier. You know, we comply with the jurisdictional law in that country, and the request that comes from the US will come to Dublin, it will come to Ireland, and then that government agency in the country will deal with it.
Yeah, I would answer very generically that as a cloud provider, or probably every cloud provider will obviously do an analysis on where to build data centers. And whether it's Google, whether it's Amazon, whether it's Microsoft, we all have our evaluation criteria. And these evaluation criteria include energy prices, they include economic stability, they include the cost of securing the land, etc. So these are not necessarily open criteria, and apparently Dublin seems to be a hub for data centers. So we have a Google data center, an Amazon data center, a Microsoft data center. In other areas, you only find an Amazon data center, you only find a Microsoft data center. So, but in the end, yes, everybody will have that qualification list. And I think also everyone, I don't know the specifics about Google, we have exactly the same region concept. I think that's also a commonality between the cloud providers. So we all build things locally, close to customers, and then allow to expand. And it just seems that sometimes we get to different conclusions about where it's best to build our data centers.
Was Lithuania on the list sometime? Was Lithuania on the probable list of sites?
I can only talk for Microsoft. We do not exclude any country, but of course that criteria list is a pretty long one, and the data center investment is a triple-digit million investment. So we are very cautious in where we build and when we build. And at the moment, we operate out of Amsterdam and Dublin. We have a data center in Helsinki. We have a few more in Europe. And of course, we're expanding at the moment, but it's based on demand. It's based on the internet connectivity, etc. And as such, we constantly review the picture. And there's no country excluded. Well, let's put it this way: there's no democratic country excluded per se.
Okay, thanks. What about
Amazon works the same way. I mean, customer demand is the primary driver for us, and we're constantly evaluating that. It's in Frankfurt, for example, it's one of our biggest growing region that we have out of all the 11 ones, and Dublin is growing really, really fast as well. So yeah, we never exclude new countries, but it depends on a lot of factors, connectivity being one of them, but customer demand being the first one.
Okay,
thanks a lot.
More questions? Don't see any hands yet. Okay, so probably it means that we, at least for now, exhausted our topic. It was very interesting to hear from very many angles what safety is about, what security is about in the cloud. So I thank the panelists for being here, for finding an opportunity and time to come to discuss and to share with you what they have to say about the security. Thank you. Maybe some concluding remarks or some...
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me up here in beautiful Vilnius. For me, it's the first time being here, and I'm really impressed by the city, and I look forward to going out for a stroll in the afternoon. So thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. If there are any additional questions, reach out to any one of us here in the Microsoft team in Lithuania, or come to me directly. I can be found through the organizers. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, same for me. Thank you very, very much. Luckily enough, I arrived yesterday, and I had a few slots yesterday and today. So I visited the beautiful country, well, the capital we have at least. I've seen that part of it. One thing that impressed me a lot in this conference was the youth that was here. How many young people and the energy are here, and the energy behind it. And I spoke at two of the startup sessions, and I thought that the energy that I saw in the room and the questions I got were really, really impressive. And I think, by subject to cloud, I think that it's a massive enabler for all this youth. And I encourage a lot of the students that I've seen today to just try out and try new businesses, try new ideas. And I can see the potential here for a lot of bright people doing a lot of very, very smart things. So yeah, thank you very much for having me.
So thank you for being here, for sharing with us. Thank you.